Well, I'm glad to see all of you guys here this morning. This morning, as you might know, is the first Sunday in March. I hope that means pretty soon that the weather will start getting a little milder because spring actually begins in the month of March. But the first Sunday in March for us means something else too. It means that we are entering another important season in the church, and that's Lent. So Lent is this church season. It's a time where we, as a church, spend 6 weeks. Some people call it the 40 days of Lent because you can measure it by 40 days if you don't count the Sunday. So in the 6 weeks or the 40 days before Easter, we spend this time in Lent reflecting on the sacrifice that Jesus made for us on the cross. Now, it's a common tradition for Christians to give something up for Lent, right? If you've ever heard the term fasting, right? Lent can be a season of fasting. We fast, we abstain from something that we enjoy so that every time we think about that thing that we're fasting from, or every time we crave it, that we remember the sacrifice that God made for us and why it is that we're abstaining. You know, when I was a kid, it was popular to give something up during the season of Lent, and I wasn't really into giving up something that I enjoyed for 6 weeks, and so I would give up things like broccoli and lima beans, right? When I was a kid, I'd hear people saying, "Oh, I'm giving up this for Lent." Yeah, I'm giving up veggies. One year I tried giving up taking out the trash. My parents were never really on board with that one. It didn't really matter that I explained to them that this was just so that I could better understand the sacrifice that Christ had made for me. You know, when Katie and I were newly married and young, we were in our early 20s, and we were working in ministry at a church in Sydney, Ohio. And so we challenged the entire student ministry. We challenged all the students to try and think of something that they could fast from, something that they could give up for this season of Lent, something that would be meaningful to them, so they would think about it. I gave up French fries that year. You know, Katie and I we were both working in full-time ministry, and since we weren't parents yet, we were hardly ever home. So we ate out a lot. We were also still at that age where, at least for me, I didn't gain any weight eating out a lot and eating a lot of French fries. And so French fries, actually giving up French fries for this 6 weeks or this 40 days of Lent before Easter was a bit of a challenge for me. It was a sacrifice. My wife, Katie, she gave up chocolate. See, if you know Katie, you know, number one, she loves chocolate. So that was already a big enough sacrifice for Lent. But we worked at the church, and there was always some sort of treat that was chocolate-oriented that somebody would bring in. It was just one of those churches where, like, a couple times a week, somebody would just show up with a plate of goodies. Here you go, guys. So there was always a treat at the church. You know, throughout this season of Lent, we were both doing really well. And we were determined that we were going to set a good example for all of the students that we had challenged to do the same. I remember it was the last week of Lent. This was the week before Easter. And we had made it to the home stretch. Katie was out running errands that day, and she came back from her errands and told me, you know, hey, I grabbed lunch while I was gone, and I stopped at Wendy's, Steve, and I ate some French fries. You know, she knew we were in the final stretch, so she was kind of getting that little dig, like, man, they were so good. And then she says, you know, I had French fries and I had a sandwich, and oh man, I haven't had this for such a long time, but I was there, and I just thought, man, I'm going to splurge and get myself a Frosty. I thought she was joking. I said, you didn't get a Frosty, did you? She said, yeah, I got a Frosty. I'm serious. And I said, Katie, why would you break the fast on the last week before Easter? And Katie kind of laughed at me. She's like, I didn't break my fast. I informed her at that point that she had because Frosties were chocolate. Katie confidently stated to me, she said, Frosties are not chocolate. I said, well, what flavor do you think a Frosty is? And she looked at me with dead serious, and she says, well, look, they're a Frosty flavor. She was so convinced that they were not chocolate that I picked up the phone in our office and I dialed the Wendy's. And this sweet young lady answers the phone, and and I put her on speakerphone, and I said, yes, ma'am, I'm just wondering if you could tell me, please, what flavors of Frosty you sell. Now, this was back in the day before this abomination of a Frosty, this vanilla thing they have now. This was back when there was only one Frosty. And this sweet girl, I said, what types of flavors do you sell with your Frosties? And she said, really sweet, she said, sir, we only have chocolate Frosties. Katie was devastated. Now, I have to apologize. I've been getting some comments lately that some of you think I pick on my wife a lot in my sermons, but she's the one that tells me, she said, Steve, this is a great story, go for it. And let's be honest, she's much more interesting than I am, right? I'm pretty boring, and so it's also a good way to keep her humble. So anyway, fasting has been an effective way to remind us of what Christ has done for us. Now this year, we're going to participate as a church in something called 40 Acts. And so instead of giving something up during this season of Lent, the 6 weeks of preparation before Easter, the 40 days, that's where the 40 part comes from, 40 Acts. Right? Instead of giving something up like red meat or chocolate or French fries or social media, I've done that one before. Instead of giving something up, we're going to spend these 40 days of Lent focusing on acts of kindness to others. Think of it as sacrificing our self-focus and looking for ways to think of other people. So I thought it'd be good for us this year to have these opportunities through each week of Lent to do something for others, right? To grow continuously ourselves as we love people irrationally, as we serve selflessly, and give generously together. So in much the same way, if you were around here during Advent, the time that led up to Christmas this year, as we approached Christmas, we did this thing where we did a hashtag PCC Christmas 2019. And this year, we're encouraging you to participate in our 40 Acts opportunities. And then take a picture while you're doing it, and then use the hashtag, and I want you guys to write this down somewhere, right? You got a page of notes there. Write this down. Is hashtag PCC, the number 40, Acts. Hashtag PCC 40 ACTS. Okay? So it's hashtag PCC 40 Acts. And anything that you hashtag with PCC 40 Acts, we'll be able to find those on Instagram and on Facebook, and then we'll show them like we did at Christmas on Sundays. And hopefully it'll just be a fun encouragement as you see others who are sharing this experience as we're preparing for Easter. So for example, this week you're encouraged, if you've signed up already, and a lot of you have, if you've signed up for the Passover Seder that's on Wednesday night. This year, that's actually, Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, okay? This coming Wednesday is our Passover Seder, and it's Ash Wednesday. If you've signed up for that, go to that, take a picture, hashtag PCC40Acts. Also this week, we want to encourage you guys to write an encouraging note to somebody here at the church, okay? So somebody that's part of our PCC family that you feel God leading you to shoot a note of encouragement to, write an encouraging note to somebody here at the church. Those are the two things that we want to encourage you guys to do today, this week, and hashtag PCC40Acts. So you can do one or both of the two opportunities that we're going to be kind of promoting for you each week. And we're going to let you know those every Sunday throughout Lent. Then they'll appear a couple times during the week on our social media. So if you follow us on Facebook and Instagram, you'll see some reminders there. And then your final reminder will be the Friday all-church email that goes out. You see, Lent officially starts this coming Wednesday, which is referred to as Ash Wednesday. And a lot of us here, there's over 100 people that are signed up to spend Ash Wednesday together participating in the Passover Seder. That's the Passover dinner. That's what Jesus was sharing with his disciples on the night that he was betrayed. And so if you signed up for that experience, do me a favor. Don't let anything get in the way this week. If somebody says, hey man, I need blah, blah, blah from you on Wednesday, you're going to say, nope, got a Passover Seder I'm going to. It's going to be a really meaningful experience. It'll be a great start to the Lenten season this year. You see, we're getting a head start today on Lent. Technically, we're not in Lent yet. That starts Wednesday. But we're going to get a head start today in this new message series that we're calling Back to the Start. And so we're going to be spending today and all of Lent on Sundays looking in the book of Acts. Are you seeing a theme? 40 Acts, the book of Acts. It's almost like we planned it this way, okay? So we're going to spend every week together focusing on the book of Acts, back to the start, looking at the early church, right after Christ's death, how the church started. And so today I pray that you and I will all, as we experience this, that we'll be inspired by the zeal of the apostles that's described in the passage that Jill read for us this morning. You see, we saw in our passage this morning that after appearing before the Sanhedrin, the religious rulers, one of the Pharisees, Gamaliel, he tries to persuade the religious leaders, he tries to persuade these Pharisees not to kill the apostles. And so we see from verse 40, it says, his speech persuaded them. They called the apostles in and had them flogged. Then they ordered them not to speak in the name of Jesus, and they let them go. The apostles left the Sanhedrin rejoicing because they had been counted worthy of suffering disgrace for the name. Day after day in the temple courts and from house to house, they never stopped teaching and proclaiming the good news that Jesus is the Messiah. Now, what I want to do today is to take a closer look at why the apostles, why are they actively rejoicing because of their suffering? Right? Why are they not just gritting their teeth and enduring it and just putting up with it? Why are they actively rejoicing? And I hope that as we take a closer look into their actions and learn throughout this 40 Acts journey that we're going to go on, that we're going to take together this year, I hope that we'll become more aware of how we can connect with our passion for Christ. Right? I want us to examine our individual zeal for Christ. Do we have the same enthusiasm today that we had when we first became Christians? When we can connect again to the why we worship Him, it'll help us to remember our mission here as a church, which is to live like Christ and to love like Christ so that others can know Christ. And I think the first reason as we look at this, the first reason that the apostles rejoiced in their suffering is because, and here's your first fill in the blank, they were clear about their mission to spread the gospel. How can they rejoice in the midst of suffering? It's because they were clear about their mission to spread the gospel. It's important for us to know that the disciples finally understood what their job was. And they weren't put off despite facing some serious oppression. How clear are we about our mission as disciples of Jesus? And how easily are we put off? See, prior to what happened in our passage today, we see in Acts chapter 4, right before what we read, is that the rulers and the teachers of the law, they had forbidden these apostles. They had forbidden them to speak in the name of Jesus. And they had imprisoned them in Acts chapter 5 because of the miraculous signs and wonders that the disciples were doing. And they had also imprisoned them because of the growth that they saw and the number of believers. And so these apostles, they're told, don't speak of Jesus. But they didn't listen. See, they had a mission to accomplish, and nothing was going to stop them. In today's passage, the priests, they brought the apostles before the Sanhedrin, and they wanted to put them all to death. Right? This is serious. And the disciples knew what the possible consequences would be, because the Pharisees had already put Jesus to death. So why would, if Jesus was just killed recently, why would they treat these apostles any different? The only reason that the apostles are not killed is because the Sanhedrin, the religious leaders, they're warned by one of their own, Gamaliel, a teacher of the law. And it says he was honored by all the people. And he warns them, he says, you need to let these guys go. But they didn't let them go without first showing the people that they were still deserving of punishment. Right? Hopeful that this punishment the apostles received would be some sort of deterrent to others so they would not do the same. And this was the first actual experience of persecution of the new Christians that's affecting all 12 of the apostles. The flogging that it said they were flogged. So the flogging that the disciples experienced would have probably been the 39 lashes. Right? We see this noted in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 2 and 3, where it says, "If the guilty person deserves to be beaten, the judge shall make them lie down and have them flogged in his presence with the number of lashes the crime deserves. But the judge must not impose more than 40 lashes. If the guilty party is flogged more than that, your fellow Israelite will be degraded in your eyes." This is the same punishment that Paul speaks of experiencing himself in 2 Corinthians 11:24. Paul says, 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. The disciples knew to expect this kind of treatment because Jesus told them to expect it. In Matthew 10, Jesus says, "I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves. Be on your guard. You will be handed over to the local councils and be flogged in the synagogues." So first we see that the disciples were rejoicing because they were clear about their mission. Now, I also believe that they rejoiced because, here's number 2 for you, they were not surprised by the opposition. They were not surprised by the opposition. See, in addition to what we find Jesus saying in Matthew 10, they would have remembered Jesus' teaching in the Beatitudes. He said in Matthew 5:11 through 12, "Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." See, these men who had witnessed Jesus' death, these were the same people that saw it happen. And they knew firsthand the extent to which Jesus had suffered for all of them. And so therefore they considered it, they remembered his teaching in the Beatitudes, and they considered it an honor to experience even a small amount of what Christ had been through for their sake and for our sake. See, they had their eyes on Jesus and on what he had done for them and for the world. And they had their eyes on eternity. They had their eyes on eternity with Jesus. Instead of having their eyes on the temporary things, their temporary lives here on earth. I think many of us miss those 2 important realities, right? See, we forget all that Jesus has done for us and all that we have been forgiven. And we also forget that this life is temporary. You know, sadly, since I've been here as your pastor, I've done a lot of funeral services, more than I would like to do for sure. And you're all aware that we have lost a number of people from this congregation last year and so far this year. And I'd be remiss if I were to say that those people weren't greatly missed. Of course, their absence is felt by those who love them. And they're thought of every single day by those who knew them best. But because of the honor that I get being with these families as they say goodbye, I've been reminded over and over that this life is temporary. That there's something more. There's something better. And we can't forget that. We have to have our eyes on eternity. See, so when the beatings came for the apostles, they weren't surprised. A public whipping would have been intended to shame the disciples. But see, it had the opposite effect because their eyes were on eternity. See, there's a huge difference between the frightened apostles, these frightened people who were too scared to even be seen with Jesus after his arrest, and the men who are now rejoicing after experiencing this flogging. See, this shows the power of the Holy Spirit. It shows how the Holy Spirit is at work in them since Jesus' departure. And it also shows us their conviction in his resurrection. You know, in today's world here, in a Western society, though we may not be persecuted in the way that we saw the apostles persecuted in today's reading, we may still expect to be treated with some kind of disdain for our faith. Some of us can relate to the sarcasm or the ridicule, even by those that we would call our friends, those non-believing friends or family. I can remember going to my 20th high school reunion several years ago. And when my former classmates would ask me, so hey, what do you do? Our conversations usually ended when I told them that I was a pastor. I mean, it would go something like this: Hey, Steve Sherrill, right? Yeah, how's it going? Oh, it's good. How are you doing? Well, I'm doing well. So what are you up to these days? And I would say, well, I'm actually pastoring at River North Church. Oh, good to see you, man. I'm not sure what it was that they were so put off by, but I wasn't really surprised at the rejection. And I didn't take it personally, because I've learned to see it as an honor, right? They reject me as they reject him. But see, that can't stop me. So even though a number of conversations I had with old classmates stopped pretty short after I let them know that I was a pastor, I'll never forget a classmate of mine named John. After I told John what I did, John replied, "Man, I need to hang out with you." And I looked him straight in the eye and I said, "Well, John, let's make that happen." And so I got his phone number and I called him later that week, and we arranged to meet up and have some coffee together. And we spent 4 hours at a coffee shop. And John was able to unload and unburden himself. John and I weren't even friends in high school. I think we shared a woodshop class together once. We didn't hang around with each other as kids, and quite frankly, we didn't have much in common when we were in school, and hadn't had much in common since we graduated. But because I wasn't afraid of receiving the rejection from some of my other classmates, because I didn't censor myself when John asked me what I did, I was able to be there for John and to tell him how much God loved him no matter what he was going through. See, the Bible tells us in 1 Peter chapter 4, starts in verse 12, it tells us that rejection and persecution is something that we should expect as Christians. It says in verse 12, "Dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice, inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. If you're insulted because of the name of Christ, you are blessed, for the Spirit of God and for the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you." It may not always make sense to us, but God's way is so often the opposite to the world's way of thinking. See, our focus as Christians should be eternal, looking forward to our heavenly inheritance. And God has promised to be with us always while we are here on earth, no matter what we're going through. The apostles, they never stopped in their devotion to share the good news of Jesus. And we might feel that it would have been easier for them to have had this perseverance in the face of oppression because they had met Jesus in the flesh. And it was recent for them. They had seen and they understood the victory that came after the death of Jesus. And they now trusted God to redeem even the worst of situations. And so they may have had this advantage over us, is what we think. But how then can we keep Jesus alive in our minds and in our hearts so that we can have a similar perspective that they had? Here's your third one. We can ask God to increase our faith. Ask him to increase our faith. See, when we ask him to increase our faith, when we ask him to show us his presence, he will. And we can ask him to show us his presence this week as we try to step out of our normal everyday and bless somebody with one of our 40 Acts prompts. He'll use your faithfulness to bless not only someone else, but he'll use it to bless you also. In Acts chapter 5, verse 42, it says, day after day in the temple courts and from house to house, they never stopped teaching and proclaiming the good news that Jesus is the Messiah. The apostles and the new Christians spoke about Jesus day after day. They couldn't help themselves. It wasn't just something reserved for holy days or the Sabbath. And in the same way, 40 Acts is a chance for us to become aware of how we can bless others, how we can bless others daily. Why not let this season, in our Back to the Start series, why not let this be an opportunity for us to be brave, to step out of our comfort zone and let our love for Jesus become public? And so that's why we're giving you these ideas through the season of Lent with our hashtag PCC40 Acts. Now, of course, we want you to be sensitive to others as you do these, but don't talk yourself out of embracing God's agenda. Would you pray with me?